Tonight. Well, it is Friday the 13th, and it was a scary day for one politician, Vincent Leibel, who was sent to prison, or sentenced to prison, and he'll be there in July. Here to talk more about the latest chapter in Albany corruption, plus to reflect on Andrew Cuomo's week-long Bash the Legislature tour, are the reporters of the Roundtable, some of the Capitol's finest journalists who join me today on a virtual table because our set remains under construction. With me are Ken Lovett of the New York Daily News and our very own Nick Reisman. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me.
Good to be here.
Good to be here.
Okay, so let's start with a kind of a mixed week of news for Andrew Cuomo. He went on tour, of course, and he was pretty well received, but he had some sort of mixed reviews regarding ethics. He got into a bit of a verbal scrum there with Dean Skelos, the majority leader of the Senate, and the gay marriage situation is a little iffy right now. Let's just start with Skelos. The ethics bill, do you think we're going to see one pass at some point?
I think we will see one pass. You know, the threat of the governor putting a Moreland Act commission is hanging out there. Plus, I think the legislature wants to get something done. We'll see what it looks like in the end. But I do believe what we've seen this week for the first time is that the legislature is starting to tire of the governor's rhetoric. During the budget, you know, he hammered them, but in the end, they knew he held the final, the final act where he could just shove the budget into one extender.
Right.
Now it's a 50-50 proposition, and you can see they do not like being lectured and they do not like being criticized.
Yeah, you see the criticism kind of rising just a little bit when it comes to, what Dean Skelos sees as, kind of Andrew Cuomo acting maybe a little bit like Eliot Spitzer did when he first took office in 2007. Now, Andrew Cuomo is not going around to legislators' districts and singling out specific rank-and-file backbencher lawmakers to, go along with his agenda. And I think Andrew Cuomo yesterday in Buffalo even went to pains again to say this isn't about specific legislators, it's about the legislature writ large.
Right.
However, it goes back to that old, you attack one person or you attack the legislature, they all flock back to the leader, which we've seen with Spitzer, and it seems like we're seeing again, too.
And even Shelley Silver, the Assembly Speaker, kind of, for the first time that I can remember, kind of took a small slap at the governor when, I had asked him about what he thought of the governor's comments in Buffalo. And he more or less said, look, I'm looking for solutions, not rhetoric, period.
Yeah, that was, the other thing, though, is what I think Cuomo specifically said was, look, most of the legislature are good people. Most of these people are good, honest men and women. It's just that, but then that doesn't really jive with the things that he says when he gets up there onto the podium and he says they don't want to disclose and you need to make them disclose and they have a spending addiction and they're not interested in doing anything good. I mean, writ large, to actually criticize the legislature. Look, the legislature is made up of individual people. Just because you don't single them out doesn't mean that you're not.
And as like Ken pointed out, he's got that hammer, I guess, when it comes to the Moreland Act Commission. But even now there's this disagreement over whether the governor is even interpreting the Moreland Act Commission properly.
Right.
And that's something that could be this, very drawn-out lawsuit if he tries to enact or impanel some sort of commission to investigate individual members of the legislature. Now, I guess the logical conclusion of this is we could have, somebody from Weiss and Luxembourg, which is where Shelley Silver is an attorney, could come out and say, what does Speaker Silver do there exactly? What would you say his job is there? But until then, even now, I think there's some thoughts among lawmakers that a Moreland Act wouldn't exactly, carry as much punch as the governor's making it out to be.
And it would also be an act of war.
Right, well, that's the thing.
That would be the end of his agenda.
That's correct.
Anything else he wants would be torpedoed, and you would see that from Democrats, and the Democrats showed that, when they felt that Spitzer turned on them, they turned on him. So This is not a love-love relationship.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not going to help him. Let's say he does, in Moreland Act Commission, he says if they don't pass a bill, an ethics bill by the end of the session, which is supposed to end on the 20th, then he would put together a Moreland Act Commission, which would have subpoena power. It would be able to investigate at least individuals, if not the entire body. As Nick, you raised, it's perhaps a legal problem, but that would go into the next session, and that would go into the next budget. Oh, and by the way, next year is an election year, and that would just make the
Right.
whole situation untenable.
No, I mean, he's got a good point right now to try to get some of the more controversial items on his agenda, the big three, as it were, the ethics, the property tax cap, same-sex marriage legalization. It's a good point to try and get it done this year, because next year is going to be an election year, and there's going to be all sorts of posturing and you know, all sorts of special items that individual legislators want to get done. So yeah, trying to get it all done this year makes sense. However, you're right, the Moreland Commission would be that act of war.
And I think that, you know, I think ethics reform is moving along. I do believe that he and the Speaker are close, you know, to a deal. The Speaker says they have a deal. We'll see. But, and I think the Senate will come along. I think ultimately all sides agree there needs to be some kind of bill. The legislature for its credibility, and the governor because it's a key priority of his.
Yeah.
I think he's going to have a harder time on things like property tax cap and certainly gay marriage.
Yeah, let's talk about gay marriage. This week we saw some questionable things, actually. The governor comes out and says, look, we don't want the bill to go back to the Senate floor to die. We don't want to put it up for a vote if we don't have the votes. But doesn't that give Dean Skelos an out? Can't Dean Skelos, who said, I'm going to go to my conference and say, okay, guys, do you want this to come to the floor? I think it should. Let's put it to the floor. And they say, we don't really want to be put on the hook. We don't want Mike Long from the Conservative Party mad at us. And he says, okay, and he goes to the governor and says, votes aren't there.
Yeah, I think I think that's going to be the most interesting thing to watch as we move forward the next few weeks. You know, the advocates are really trying to push, but what they are hoping for is that a single Republican comes forward and says, I will vote for this bill, because they feel that would break the logjam. But I'm not quite sure we're going to see it.
You know, the behind-the-scenes jockeying on this, as we've seen over the last couple of weeks and months even, is fascinating. It's probably one of the loudest and yet also quietest lobbying campaigns that we've seen in Albany history. You know, the Empire State Pride agenda has this big rally where Governor Cuomo doesn't even make an appearance, which we all thought was odd, but then he quietly meets with the folks from the Empire State Pride agenda, along with Steve Cohen, who is the governor's secretary, his top aide, and also the point man on this issue. So, you know, I think Cuomo is trying to play this very, very careful chess game behind the scenes, very quietly working to get this done. And we have to remember that he needs this very badly in order to shore up support in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. There's a lot of folks out there who are, I mean, they're not going to go and vote for a Republican in 2014, but there are a lot of folks out there who are not very enthusiastic about this governor. They know he's a Democrat, but they're looking at his budget cuts, they're looking at his cuts to education, and they think to themselves, this guy isn't acting like a true Democrat. He gets gay marriage, and that, you know, kind of restores his credibility in his own party.
Well, and it restores his credibility in a national sense. I mean, if he gets gay marriage, that is a national get for him. And particularly when you talk about a guy who's being floated as, well, at one point he was floated as a potential VP contender. I don't really think that's real for 2012, but maybe 2016 as a presidential contender, which is something, of course, that his father never actually did.
And picture it. I mean, you know, in the same year, he could, you know, appease the liberal wing of the party by saying we brought, you know, gay marriage and, you know, whatever rent control bill they get done. At the same time, saying we cut, you know, we closed a $10 billion budget deficit without raising taxes.
Yeah,
who does this, you know who this reminds me of very much, and it sounds a little like I'm going out on a limb here, but remember Hillary Clinton when she was in the Senate in 2004, 2005, and she was staking out a very conservative, very muscular foreign policy position. Meanwhile, she was staying very socially liberal for New York, you know, and then she runs for president in 2008.
But Nick, hold on, because, you know, think about it, and this is actually pretty interesting. Hillary Clinton, still to this day, has never endorsed gay marriage. She's still for civil unions, and her daughter, Chelsea, is actually calling for the gay marriage effort here in New York, and her husband, former President Bill Clinton, said he was wrong to oppose gay marriage, and now he's endorsed it too. So it's a pretty fascinating thing. I do agree that Andrew Cuomo is really sort of trying to thread the needle on this one, and it's pretty fascinating. And look, we're running out of time, unfortunately, but I just want to ask you both very quickly. Nick, we'll start with you. Of these three, Do you think that the governor can get the trifecta, or is he only going to get one? And if so, what will it be?
I think he'll get perhaps 2 out of the 3. I don't think he'll score all 3. You know, ethics obviously is probably the one that's most palpable right now because it's the one that's the least partisan, quite frankly. It's the one that he can get Republicans and Democrats to go along with.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll get the tax cap with some exemptions or some compromise. I see very little room for compromise or very little wiggle room he can get when it comes to same-sex marriage.
Kenny, last word to you.
I agree. I think he gets ethics reform 50-50 right now on property tax cap, and if I had a bet, I don't think he gets gay marriage, but there's still a lot of time left, and we don't know what he's going to offer individual Republicans. He hasn't even started lobbying them yet.
That's true. He hasn't made those calls. Okay, I want to thank you very much, Nick Reisman and Ken Lovett, for joining me. It's good to see you guys virtually, and I'll be seeing you in reality soon.